Hello? Okay. Test.
Hi, everybody there. This is Mark Olafson and Nicole. Sorry about that. This is Mark Olafson and Nicole Foots at the Texas Education Agency. Hopefully you're online you're on the line for the data working group meeting. I think we've got it sorted out who's on mute and who's not on mute now. We will, it looks like we've still got a few people joining here, so we will probably give people just a couple more minutes before we hop into stuff. If you, Nicole's monitoring the chat, so if you are having audio issues, please do let us know over there. You should see a big screen that says Data Work Group 3-5-2020 with a very nice teacher or perhaps media specialist and 3 students. My favorite intro slide. So like I said, we'll get going here in maybe just about 1 more minute, and we'll monitor the chat if folks have any technical difficulties. One more thing, it should have told you, hopefully it told you when you logged in or dialed in, but based on our conversation last time, we are recording this meeting. And you'll find on the last slide, we are still searching for exactly where these recordings should live online. But just wanted to bring your attention to that. So just about 60 more seconds, and we'll go ahead and hop into content. All right, this is Mark and Nicole back. I feel like we're on a radio show. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Hold on. There we go. So today we'll be doing we'll just do a whip around introductions. Wanted to provide some information at the top of the meeting today around a couple of areas that we want to make sure that we provide additional information on. That's the PACT and the Science of Teaching Reading. Also, then we'll have a bit of a deeper dive related to Indicator 3, providing an update and getting some feedback on that. Then we will have an update about the index. Both of those items will also take time if there's any comments if you had an opportunity to look at the draft manual around those sections, we'll talk about those pieces there. And then we'll talk about the high-performing EPP Category 4, look at the application materials that we're thinking about, the guidance for that. And finally, we'll take a look and see if we have any additional review for the draft manual that we sent out. And then at the very end, we will have a few just updates, fun links, and that sort of thing. We are on the clock for 3 hours today. If we don't take that full 3 hours, my heart will be broken. And I think that everything will come far at the seams. No, we did hold that time because we do have a lot of stuff to talk about today. But if we do kind of reach the end of our feedback prior to that, I think we can go ahead and give some time back. One last thing, you should have, within the past couple of minutes, received in your email inbox a feedback document. That's a Word document that is an opportunity for you to capture your feedback. I know sometimes in our conversations, things can emerge, and it can be, the meeting ends and you think of something else and you're like, oh man, or we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to kind of gather all your thoughts into one place. So really, although we will discuss and we'll take notes here, we do kind of utilize those feedback documents as our primary source when we kind of look through and see how frequently, you know, things came up, what different people were thinking. So we'll encourage you, you can fill those out as we go along or after we're all done. So with that said, I'd like to go ahead and move into introductions and norms. So as a reminder, the purpose of our data working group is to advise TEA on matters related to the collection, analysis, reporting, and use of ed prep data to improve the quality of ed prep programs. So we're going to do a quick whip around here, just your name, your position, and I always like it when we share the unique perspective that you bring to this group. So I'll go ahead and I'll call people out because I'm looking at people on my participant list. So my name is Mark Olafson. I'm Director of Educator Data and Ed Prep Program Management, I think is a thing that's on my title now, here at the Texas Education Agency. And unique perspective that I get to bring to this group is, you know, it's the opportunity to work with y'all and work with, you know, other stakeholders, both inside and outside the agency to kind of collaborate and drive this work forward. So that's me. The next person on my list is Sharon Evans. Sharon, could you share?
Hi, yeah, this is Sharon. So you've already said my name. I'm from the University of Texas at Austin, and my position is Director of Education Services in the Dean's Office here in the College of Ed. And I oversee certification and field experiences and career services and some pieces of induction support. And so the unique position perspective that I bring is crossing all of these areas. I deal with data and sharing out of reports and applying what we find in the data and reports across and connecting to the different areas that I direct. And so I have I think a unique perspective in that way, and also I'm very interested in the application of all of this.
Nice, thank you so much. The next person on my list is Brandon Bush. Brandon, can you unmute and join?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you.
All right, yeah, Brandon Bush, Texas Women's University, Director of our Office of Educator Prep Services. And if it's data that leads to any type of certification, all that data runs through this office. So I'm excited to see how we can use those data to not only inform our practice here at the university, but for the state as well.
Nice, thank you, Brandon. The next person on my list is Dr. Amberlyn Diaz. Dr. Diaz?
Hi, I am the department head for curriculum and instruction at Tarleton State University. And we are really working to utilize data for continuous improvement at our institution. And I came from an institution where we were moving towards analyzing data from a digital standpoint, and came to Tarleton, and we're a little antiquated where a lot of our data is on paper. So I like to be informed and just make sure that we can use the data the way it was intended.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diaz. That's an interesting perspective, and hopefully we'll be able to provide support, particularly for y'all as we continue to move forward with our, our data visualization work to help support y'all. Next on my list is Jim Vanover. Dr. Vanover.
Hey, folks. So I'm at Texas State University, Director of Evaluation and Research, and unique perspective I bring. I build relational databases to manage all the data we have at Texas State, and have worked in the with the Education Research Center data, which is the entire state data warehouse, since about 2009, I think. So lots of experience with state educational data.
Nice, thank you, Jim. The next person on my list is user K Patton. I see that you unmuted, but we don't have any audio yet from you. All right, that might be, I'm seeing that you're muting and unmuting in the room itself, but you may want to confirm that your computer mic, your computer audio in is, you've selected whichever mic that you're using. Going to give you a second to take a look at that. The next person on my line is user L Foot.
Hello, my name is Nicole Foot. I am a data analyst here at the Texas Education Agency. And my unique perspective is that I am left-handed in a right-handed world. So, and also, I like to think about the strategy of what we're doing and how we're trying to move our teacher production, teacher preparation, the entire field forward. So I'm constantly thinking, what's the big picture? And then I try to break it down into the tactics and the day-to-day implementation to move us towards that bigger strategy.
Thank you, Nicole. Next user on my list is user Marcelo S. I bet that's Marcelo Schmidt.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Marcelo Schmidt, joining from Texas Tech University. I'm Director of Assessment, Accreditation, and Data. Unique perspective is that we have experience for quite some time in our college of using dashboards. We implemented Tableau a long time ago, and then we've transitioned recently to Power BI. We've been studying this, and this is an additional bit. Just went through a CAPE accreditation process. We submitted our report this past week, and I thought that I was going to be able to click on our dashboards and magically populate my report. What I found was that most of my dashboards were not responsive to my report, and I still had to download the data, analyze it separately, and then create reports based on that. So that was a little bit frustrating. So I'm looking forward to more efficient, informative dashboards, and I think that we're working in the right direction here with this group.
Thank you for that. That's really great perspective. Thanks, Marcelo. My next user is Dr. Michael Versinga. Dr. Versinga, I think you're just monitoring. Is that correct? Still on mute, so I'll just let that one be. My next one is Dr. Ray Queen. Dr. Queen?
Yes, I am a program director here at Teachworthy, and my unique perspective is that I wear all the hats. So I have to look at the data, I do the intake, I do the certification piece. So I kind of see the whole picture and how all of our pieces work together to move candidates through the certification process.
Thank you so much. My next user is Ramona Oates.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Ramona Oates with the Region 10 certification program. The unique perspectives, I work closely with the program data, Acf Title II, and honestly love working and collaborating with groups such as this to learn daily all of the things that change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My next user is Region 19 TPCP. So I'm not sure who that is, but if you can go ahead and chime in and introduce yourself. This would be the user from Region 19.
Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Bonilla, and I am with the Region 19 Service Center in El Paso. I'm an instructor and a field supervisor, and my unique perspective is I'm still in the learning stages. I'm fairly new, but I have with me here our certification and data specialist, Cassie Barraza, as well.
Hello, I'm Cassie Barraza. I'm also Region 19, and I've been here a little while now, and I work with the Acf and Title II reports.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Kath, there out in Region 19. Happy to have you. My next user is user Sarah Guthrie.
just in my university, and really enthusiastic about the data and teacher preparation.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Oh no, we already got to hear from Dr. Evans. My last user I've got here is just the phone number 214-422-0092.
Yeah, that's Dave Saba, Chief Development Officer for Texas Teachers. And the unique perspective I bring, I think, is that we're in 8 other states, and I run around and hear what other states are doing too. And most of the time I spend telling them how great Texas is, which I'm sure they love.
Thanks so much, Dave. Just a heads up, it looks like I may have to manually mute and unmute folks who are just joining by the telephone. So if you are chiming in and you feel like, well, no, I suppose if you're only on the phone, we may not be able to get that information either. I'm not sure. Yeah, because they wouldn't be. So we may, if you are on the phone, I'm going to leave you unmuted in the program, but if you can mute your handset, we should be, I think that should be a way forward for us. But just going to go ahead and take that approach for Dave and for Sarah, who are joining us with just the phone. I see that user Kate Patton is back. User, can you introduce yourself? All right, so hopefully those, we can sort out that technical difficulty there and be able to get that sorted out. And we will go ahead and try and run it down in the chat as well. Is there anyone who we didn't get to hear from? All right, so thanks everybody for chiming in. I think that one of the fun things about this group is that we've got people with similar overlapping roles, but definitely with your own unique perspectives and certainly coming from your own ed prep program. So real quick, wanted to provide some information. At the last meeting of the SPEC that we had, there were some conversations around the pre-admission content test, and we've gone ahead and tried to put some information together, and kind of whenever we've got ed prep programs in the room, and particularly y'all with all those unique perspectives, just wanted to provide some information related to PACT. So the pre-admission content test, which is PACT, is an exam that's taken by a teacher candidate or a potential teacher candidate before admission into the EPP. So that means that they take this test and they do not need EPP test approval. PACT is defined in 19 TAC, the definition section 227.5, number 8. There it is called a content certification examination. And you'll notice in that definition, it specifically calls out that this is an examination that's used for the individual's admission to an educator preparation program. So a thing that's important for folks to remember, and I think this is coming up because, you know, we switched essentially the content of the PACT test. It's now a subject matter only test. And so it's important for us to remember that PACT is not required for certification. So first, there's 2 kind of elements to that. The first is that PACT relates only to admission. So the only place where PACT might factor in is a candidate's admission to the program, but candidates can be admitted to programs without, most candidates can be admitted to programs without PACT, and so there's the opportunity to become certified without ever having to have taken the PACT exam. The second thing is that EPPs are not required to offer a PACT route to admission. PACT is an option for programs. And I know that a lot of programs use it and use it successfully, but PACT is not required for admission. So kind of because of both those things, passing PACT is not required for certification. So why might EPPs use PACT? Well, clearly the animation on this slide was backwards. So when would an EPP use PACT to admit a candidate? there's a couple of rule citations about that. If an applicant's GPA is below the 2.5 minimum, an EPP could use PACT to admit that candidate if they wanted to admit that candidate. Or if the applicant does not have the required sort of semester credit hours in the subject area of the cert sought. So that's another, if an EPP wanted to admit that candidate, they could use PACT there. Also, we know that EPPs can have local policies, and that last citation there is about EPPs can have requirements, can have additional requirements. So we just wanted to highlight that with a lot of people talking about PACT. We just wanted to resurface that piece. And I also wanted to let y'all know, and this might be for colleagues that you have, is that the EdPrep program support team is going to host a webinar, just a half-hour webinar specifically about PACT for folks that may continue to have questions about it. That's going to be March 25th from 10:30 to 11. I'll send these slides out, or I'll post these slides. Again, we'll look at that a little bit later on. And the registration link's there, but the team there is planning on sending out sign-up information sometime early next week if folks do want to join that webinar that's going to specifically talk a lot about PACT. And then just to facilitate that webinar, I would love to collect from this group, and we can do it in discussion, or you can complete it on your feedback document as well. If you have additional questions that you think would be benefited, the webinar would benefit from addressing, I'd love to hear additional questions about PACT that the team could address in the webinar. And it sounds like K-Patton is still having issue chiming in. We do have it on the chat?
Yes.
What do we got?
K-Patton, is anyone else having difficulty with candidates already admitted accidentally signing up for the TX PACT instead of TX?
So that was, are folks having, seeing candidates accidentally take PACT? We can definitely, I'll raise that to this group, but it's a thing that we can raise in the webinar as well.
Mark, this is Ray.
Hi.
Hi. I would just like to proceed with caution on your previous slide. You said, it says PACT is not required for admission, but there are some instances where PACT is required for admission. So I just want to be really careful of that wording, because candidates will come to us and say it's not required, and they're getting verbiage off of the site. But if their GPA is low or they don't have the hours, it would be required for admission.
So let me think a little bit. Let's think a little bit about this. So I think that maybe it's that, so if a candidate didn't have the content hours, the candidate could pass PACT in order to be admitted, right?
Correct.
But I mean, the candidate could also go and get additional credit hours and then be admitted into the program.
That is correct. They could go take additional hours, but that is a situation where PACT could be required. So it makes it a little bit optional that if you don't have the GPA, you're right. You have the option to take more courses to bring up your GPA or PACT.
Exactly, and that's I think what we're trying to just we just want to make sure that we suss out that, like, just similarly, because programs are not required to offer a PACT route, but they can offer a PACT route, right? And so I think that what we just wanted to make sure, and I appreciate the feedback, and I think we can definitely be more careful with the language. And we'll loop back around with the EPP team prior to this webinar to make sure that we kind of like surface all of these issues, or this particular issue. but yeah, so there are candidates that in their current, you know, if I'm here and I want to pursue teaching history, but I don't have the history credit hours. If I wanted to get admitted to a program, my program could say, that's great, you need to pass the history pact. But I could also go and, you know, Austin Community College and pick up some additional history coursework. It would be, you know, a potentially a longer route, but it is something that it would be an option that would be open to me. I also see, Ray, anything else on that, or just the really good feedback that we need to make sure that we be super clear about that?
I think just to be super clear, and one thing that might be helpful that you guys are really pretty good at is to do like a flow chart, like a visual of, did you meet the GPA requirement? Yes or no? Then here are your options.
That's great. We can definitely work on that. Thank you. Sharon Evans, I see you raised your hand in the chat.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, I just want to get the official word on this. We've had some problem with TEA staff giving us different feedback on taking the PACT for admission purposes if there is a GPA issue. So if we were told that undergraduates, and cited some code, are not allowed to take the PAC unless it's the last semester in the university. Well, we admit our undergraduates and other people before their last semester. They're admitted 3 semesters before their last semester. And if they don't have the GPA, one of the options that it says in code is that they take the PAC up to 10% of our class. But when I have fielded this to TEA, the staff has come back over and over saying undergraduates are not allowed to take the PAC, period. So can we get clarification on that, please?
Yeah, Dr. Thank you so much for raising that. And I would ask that you make sure to capture that in your feedback document. I don't have that tech right in front of me right now, and I wouldn't feel comfortable saying this is exactly how it is and this is the exact citation. But what I can say is that we can make sure that we provide that clarity in our webinar on the 25th to programs.
All right. Has anybody else encountered this issue?
All right. Well, I encourage other folks, if you have, please do note. I think that there has been some, just kind of from conversations here, I think there has been some lack of clarity. And I think there's been continuing discussions as well related to, widening the potential for utility for PACT on the traditional route. But again, I think I don't have that right in front of me, and I wouldn't want to give an official word on anything, but we will be happy to follow up in that PACT webinar.
Yeah, so it's just kind of a conflict of 2 things that are in code. One says that you have to be an undergraduate. Undergraduates are not allowed to take the PACs unless it's their last semester. And then when they talk about the GPA exceptions, the 10% rule, it does say unless they take the PAC, they must take the PAC, and they have to have documentation and certification from the program director of certain other things. And so the code just it is not clear, and it contradicts itself in terms of this situation.
Thanks for raising that.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Any other folks, questions, comments about PACT?
Hi, Mark. It's Ray again.
Yes, ma'am.
We have experienced a couple of candidates that have not been able to secure a site to take the PACT test. Can you talk a little bit about that? And one of our candidates is a French candidate. And so I believe what she's being told is that will not, the next time that she can take the French PACT test would be in June.
Well, we can certainly run that down with our testing group. Ray, and identify. Is there what region or kind of location is that candidate in?
I believe she's in the San Antonio area, so let me do a little homework and I'll send that back to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, we can figure out what's going on.
Okay. And then I've also had a candidate that told me she spoke with someone at TEA, and they advised her to go take the PAC test, EC through 6. So I can also get you that name too, so we can kind of see what that history may be. I mean, I know there's 2 sides to every story, and was she advised that? You know, I want to verify, but I do want to make sure that candidates, when they're calling in with those questions, that staff is not telling them which test to go and take, since they're not looking at their transcripts.
Oh, yeah. No, that's that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and if you do get us the candidate, we can also track down, because we generally, depending on what route it came in, we keep phone notes, and so we can kind of see that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So folks, I am going to go ahead, encouraging you to capture additional PACT questions or suggestions for content for that webinar on your feedback document. I do want to move into our next content piece, which is talking about the science of teaching reading. We've been advised kind of every time we get ed prep programs together, we need to make sure that we reiterate what's going on with the STR requirement. So if you'll allow us a couple of minutes to do that. So as a reminder, as part of House Bill 3 in the last legislative session, the Texas Education Code was amended. Pardon me to say that candidates need to demonstrate proficiency in the science of teaching reading in order to get issuance of certificates, and that's for certs to issue from January 1st, 2021 and following. So how we've interpreted that is that means for these certifications, folks would need to pass the Science of Teaching Reading, or the STR exam. And that's going to be a requirement for the issuance of intern, probationary, and standard certs. And that's for those certs to issue January 1st, 2021 and following. So something that we've heard a lot from the field, and we need to make sure is on folks' radar, is that particularly at universities, colleges and universities, degrees don't post for December graduates until January. However, I need to recommend my candidate for certification prior to January 1st. So what should I do? We've heard a number of folks from universities say that they have reached out to their registrar, their administrative offices, and they've been able to make put a plan in place and make positive progress on this issue. Particularly if you're at a college or university where you're going to be looking for degrees to post prior to being able to recommend certs, please reach out, make sure you've got a plan in place with your administrative offices, your registrar, and your IT staff. As we showed, the January 1st deadline is in law, so we don't have wiggle room around that. So please, if you have not yet looked in to see if this is going to be an issue at your Ed Prep program, please look in to see if this is going to be an issue at your Ed Prep program and work towards resolving. We've got some time still. We've got about 9 months, but we want to make sure that this is on folks' radar. To highlight the I see Sharon, Dr. Evans there, do you want to chime in on that point?
Just real quick question. So it took a lot of work to get everybody together at this big institution to where we could work to resolve this. And I think we're at a place where we can, but we have a question for TEA in terms of everybody's gonna really move around fast to get things done here before we leave for, the university closes for 2 weeks and for the winter break. And what we wanna know is when TEA closes. So when we're ready to push the button before we leave, when is it going to be automatic? It's just be automated, or like the last email we got said, it's just going to be automatic, or will someone at TEA need to do something so that our students have their certificate in hand when they come back after January 1st?
That's a great question. I feel like I planted it. Those certificates should clear once all the cert requirements have been met and the EPPs recommend. And what's good about that is that an improvement that we've recently stood up is the processing certs live thing, which is we've updated ECO so that upon recommendation, if all the requirements are complete and fees are paid and fingerprints are complete, programs should be able to see the cert issue in real time. So if your candidates have done all of those pieces and applied, and y'all are going in there to hit recommend, you should be able to see those certs issue in real time, and you wouldn't need any TEA doesn't have to hit a button.
Okay, good. That's what I needed to be reassured of. All right. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Great. The diagram that's up front, this is for so folks who are completing their clinical teaching before or during, or maybe during or after January 1st, 2021, or if you're, in the current academic, in the next academic year and serving an internship, and that internship overlaps with January 1st, 2021. We just wanted to bring this diagram. If January 1st, 2021, for folks maybe who are doing clinical teaching, if January 1st, 2021 happens prior to them getting their standard cert, they'll need to pass the STR. The middle part there just highlights prior to January 1st, 2021, you could get your intern cert with just the content pedagogy test. But if that following January 1st, 2021, in order for you to then get your standard, you will need to complete your STR. And then finally, and this is just as a reminder kind of to everybody, that even if all of the requirements are complete and the tests are complete and the candidates have had their fingerprints cleared and done fees, if the EPP doesn't recommend an ECOS prior to January 1st, 2021, the candidate's going to have to take the STR. So that's the piece that we wanted to make sure that everybody's got a handle on and can see. Ramona, do you want to go ahead and unmute and share your question with us? I can, I suppose. Oh, it won't let me. It won't let me unmute you. That's weird. Well, what is the question that we've got?
Yeah, from Ramona Oates, we have, we accept internships year-round. If an internship starts January 2021, will the SBR have to be passed?
So that's a great question. If a candidate is going to have their intern certificate issue after January 1st, 2021, they will need to pass the STR for it. If that cert issues prior to January 1st, 2021, they'll just need the content pedagogy test for the intern cert, but they'll still need the STR for the standard cert.
I have a question from Kay Patton.
Yep.
What if a candidate has a criminal record and is investigated by TEA between being recommended for certification December 30th, 2020, and when the certificate is actually issued after the investigation?
That is a great question that I do not have an answer to, because I am not investigations, and I don't fully know how all the investigations holds work. So please do capture that on your feedback document and send it in to us so that we can make sure that we loop back with you. Again, I'm not a specialist in investigation. I know some things. as a reminder, after January 1st, 2021, folks who complete clinical teaching will need to pass their STR, their content pedagogy exam, and their PPR in order to get their standard. And then if folks are pursuing an alternative certification route that includes intern certification, they'll need to pass the content pedagogy test, the STR exam, and then prior to standard certification, they'd need to pass their PPR. We do have, there is one top of the list sort of STR support that I am aware of, and that is that there's there's another letters training that'll be May 26th and 27th. Please do reach out to Guiomar about signing up for that if your program wishes to sign up for that letters training. Also, I was chatting with Guiomar about this today, and she said that a couple of service centers, I think Region 4, was using that application that we had considered doing with programs as sort of guideposts for development, for like as far as them looking at their curriculum and their offerings and their assessments and all of that. They kind of used it as a framework for providing a critical eye towards where they might want to have additional supports in their curriculum. So that was just a suggestion that I thought I could pass along. And then did want to just take, if there's any additional questions that we can hand along related to STR that y'all have right now.
Oh, yeah, sorry, for remote outpost. Well, the bilingual candidate has to pass the STR along with bilingual supplemental, PTLPT, STR, and PPI.
So if the base certificate that the candidate is getting is like core subjects EC6, then in order for that core subjects EC6 certificate to issue, they would need the STR. Additional questions like that, please do feel free to reach out. Guiomar is a good contact for all of those. Yep.
From Kate Patton, the question is, does this mean that it will be very difficult for alt cert candidates to start internships in January 2021?
My department is not testing, so I would love to bring that question to our testing group and outline, and they can better outline with you exactly the offering dates and kind of what that means for alternative certification programs. Again, I apologize. It's the office next door to mine. It's not my office. So I'd like to go ahead and get into the fun part. Those were our big TEA updates that we wanted to make sure that we got for everybody. The next piece that we'd like to talk about is updates on ACEP Indicator 3. I'm going to hand it over to Nicole. Do you want to talk through some stuff?
Absolutely.
Do you want to sit?
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll trade seats.
We're doing a quick shuffle around the office, and we're off. So I'm going to give a quick update on the ACEP Indicator 3 work that we've been doing. And Mark's going to feel free to jump in. If you guys have any questions about the work, please ask away as well. So Indicator 3 has actually been in statute, and we've had mandates for upwards of a decade. So this is exciting that we're actually in the finishing steps towards standing it up. So we saw the education code changed, and it said educator prep programs will have a standard based on the following information that is disaggregated as it respects to race, sex, and ethnicity, achievement, including improvement in achievement of students taught by beginning teachers for the first 3 years following certification to the extent practicable. And then in TAC, we have essentially an ACEP indicator will be stood up that takes into account to the extent practicable as valid data becomes available and performance standards are developed, the improvement in student achievement of students taught by beginning teachers. And we disaggregate based on gender, race, and everything that we kind of already do throughout ACEP. So these were our mandates. This is the work that I started when I joined the agency about a year and some change ago. there has been history, there's been movement on the indicator since it went into law about 10 years ago and went into statute about 10 years ago as well. So we've seen various kind of statistical models that have come up. We've seen different analyses to see what that looks like. We've had various contracts. Essentially, we just weren't able to stand it up because we did not have, I guess, the extent practical to stand it up or the necessary data infrastructure. Is really what my analysis kind of showed me, that we didn't have the pieces in order at the agency to have a rigorous model stood up over the last couple of years or so.
Nicole, could you talk just before, this is, you've run a working group specifically on this metric. Would you just talk briefly about kind of like who was on that and that?
Yeah, absolutely. So about a year and a half ago, we started this work and I started researching kind of like what movement has already been done towards setting up the indicator. And I developed a working group that had EPP partners. I think some of you are actually members of it, so thank you for your continued cooperation and participation. We also had some teacher organizations, actual teachers, and different philanthropic organizations as a part of the work group who would join in and contribute via the meetings. We also had online prompts. People would send in their responses via email. So I was just like collecting this feedback and thinking through the problems, then problem solving what the metric would look like. Through that, we had 8 different topics for consideration, and they looked at everything from like, are the data viable? Like, can we actually make this data connection to begin with? And then we looked at things like, how do certification field types play into this model? What do the demographics look like within this model? What do campuses look like within this model? So we've had this kind of, these research questions have driven the analysis that we've been working on for the last year or so. We've been having really interesting, like rigorous conversations about this. And we actually just had a meeting last week where we're kind of thinking through what the standard would look like. And that's actually what I'm going to be presenting in the next couple slides. So with that, so in order to meet the mandate, we decided to use student growth data from the K-12 accountability system and map it to EPP. So K-12, the big A-F accountability system, has 3 different domains within it with 4 different data points. So the first domain is like student performance. So that's pure student proficiency. That's how students performed on the STAR exam. Domain 2 is school progress and like student progress. And that's made up of 2 different indicators, 2 different data points. The first of which, 2A, is student growth. And I will get to that graphic in a second. So that's student growth is essentially the deltas between each year for the student performance. So if they had a proficiency level in the 3rd grade, we're tracking what their proficiency level in the 4th grade was and seeing what those changes are in between those. The other half of the school progress domain was relative performance. So it takes the student performances of different demographic groups and compares them to one another. So the student actually kind of becomes their own control. You compare a student in this group to a student in that group at a different school to see how they're performing. And then the final domain is, I think it's like CCMR. It's like college, career, military readiness, and kind of other indicators for secondary schools. So that's a quick primer on A-F. But
I would just like to say, Nicole did that with no script and no graphic. That was an impressive off the top of your head.
Thank you. Thank you. I did break a sweat though. I will admit that. Yeah.
No, that's better than I can do.
So, the measure that we're using, domain 2A, which is student growth. Again, this is tracking the changes between proficiency levels for the different grades for school year. So in this example, you see at the bottom left, or the left column, you have the 3rd grade proficiency level. So let's say a student was at approaches proficiency in the 3rd grade. And in the 4th grade, let's say that same student moved up to masters or meets. Then the growth score for that student, as you can see in the column on the far right, would be 1 point awarded because they've accelerated their growth. Like this, we've measured their growth, we've tracked their proficiency levels, and we see the differences between their performance level, and then we give them a score based on the changes in their performance. So with this specific indicator, what's interesting is like if a student starts and ends at the exact same proficiency level, they still get points awarded. They get 0.5 points awarded. The only way to not get a point within this system is started at one proficiency level and ended at one lower than that proficiency level, in which case that student would get a 0. So that's actually going to be important to note when we're thinking through what the indicator looks like and how we've made kind of strategic decisions in setting the standards and creating test scores and whatnot. Are there any questions about this? Okay, cool. Okay. Awesome. So for the A through F model, this is the top route is the K-12, and they take student outcomes and they aggregate into different cohorts. So that can be class, that can be like 4th grade ELA. That can also be demographic groups, as we saw in the relative performance domain. Various different cohorts, however, A through F decides to slice it. And they roll it up to the campus level, and campus gets scores, a district gets scores, et cetera. Through our model, we take the student growth scores and we roll them up to the beginning teacher, and then roll that information up to the Educator Prep program. And we're actually about to have a conversation about what those different aggregation levels look like, because there are 2 different strategies we can use within this model itself. So we're creating a standard. So the data that we pulled, and just to backtrack a little bit, so when engaging with the working group, I actually was using pilot data for about 17 EPPs. We were able to make this data connection for 2017-18 school year. And we were looking at, the data that were available and thinking through what the numbers look like itself, but we had not gotten to the crafting of the standard part because we were doing all the research questions. In November of last year, I was able to get this full data set for 2017-18 and 18-19 for all EPPs throughout the state. So we were able to do more rigorous analysis. And it brought up this question surfaced while we were thinking through what the standard would look like, because there are multiple layers within this data set. So we have the students themselves have growth scores, and those students are housed within courses. So when I say course, I really just mean the subject area for their STAR exam. So think ELA, think math. I think actually Algebra 2, EOC is included in this. We have growth scores for that, but think of that as the course. And some teachers teach multiple tested courses. So imagine a world in which a teacher with ET6 is teaching both ELA and math for their 4th graders. And then EPPs, as you are aware, have multiple teachers and multiple completers. So we have this kind of interesting dynamic where each different layer is made up of different data points. So we're thinking through which data points we want to, how we want to highlight different data points to move forward. So that looks like this question. We think of 2 different routes. We have the course level aggregation, where back in this image, you see the students make up a course. It comes to this beautiful math equation, which essentially says we take all of the students within that course and divide it, we get the average scores for that course. And we multiply it by 100 just to scale it. And what that looks like in this table at the bottom right is, as you see, teacher A has this growth score within the math course, within the math STAR. Teacher B has this growth score also within the math STAR. Teacher B teaches another subject, they also teach ELA, and that's their growth score for their ELA. And then we see teacher C has this growth score for ELA. All 3 of those teachers are associated with the EPP, but teacher B can technically be counted twice because they have multiple subjects that they're teaching. So that's one way to aggregate the information. If we take each course level and roll it up to the EPP, then some teachers will be counted twice because they have multiple entries. In that case, there will be 4 scores associated with this EPP. In the next aggregation level with the teacher, if you see in the table in the bottom right, teacher B's score have been collapsed. So whereas they had a 65, I believe, in math, and then they had a 70 in ELA, that averages out to a 67.5 as of their total, their overall score. And so there will only be 3 scores associated with the EPP, and that's how we would aggregate at the teacher level. So there wouldn't be duplicates in creating the number, the score, but there are some kind of changes to the model because of it. So we didn't look at this aggregating by the teacher in the pilot, but if we look at year 18 and 19, you can see the average growth score for the model. Now this is for the entire model. The average growth scores for the model typically go down when you aggregate at the teacher level, when you start collapsing the teacher courses down to one level. So we see the middle two columns was aggregated by course, the average growth score is like a 66. When you aggregate by teacher, the average growth score is like a 65. And then for 19, it's like the same 65 to a 64.
Well, now, see, I have to chime in.
You have to chime in.
Because it is a small amount.
It is
so
very
we
small.
would actually round both year 18 both to 66, and we would round both if we rounded to the whole number. And we would round year 19
That's a
both
fair point.
to 65. So in both cases, we do see it's a little bit more. It's about 0.3 of a point if we when we look at the overall state average with the course approach versus the teacher approach. So I just wanted to flag that was very close. I'll turn it back over to you.
That's fine, very close. Yeah, depending on the rounding, it could actually be inconsequential. But I did want to do due diligence and show that we have thought through the differences in the aggregation of what they actually mean. So we also considered different approaches. So we were thinking through, like, this indicator is unique. It's unlike other indicators in that it's like the type of data that we're generating is it's just different. So we were thinking, like, what if we had a norms-based approach where we took the average of all EPPs, like the average of EPP completers' performances, and made that the standard, and then as long as EPPs like had a way via maybe a confidence interval or through their actual raw performance, were meeting these norms, then they would be fine. So it would allow for us to have like relative performance comparisons between EPPs. It will adapt to statewide trends because we're seeing a strong growth within A through F where like schools are improving, which is the good news. Like there is no cutoff in A through F. In an ideal world, every school would be rated A. So there's no normalizing against that. So that's actually good. We could see that exact same phenomenon through this model if we had a norms-based approach. Unfortunately, it's not comparable each year because what it means to meet in 17, 18 is not what it's going to mean to meet the standard in 18, 19. And that's important when we're thinking about like small group exemptions and how we, for smaller programs that may not have the 10 in threshold, how do we compare each year if the years aren't comparable? Like, I don't know, it was just one of those questions of like whether or not we could build a standard that would allow for collapsing of multiple years if each year is normed differently. And also more complicated calculations were needed to create kind of the confidence interval, which we'll talk to in a second. And there were some demographic considerations about like some of the dangers of norming, comparing different demographic groups to the quote unquote norm. So we'll walk through that in a second as well. I think we decided on a standards-based approach because we wanted to compare EPP performance to a preset standard regardless of statewide performance. And what that allows us to do is like, now our standards are predictable because they're preset. Every year it will probably be the same. There's a steady target for both future understanding of their performance, but also for EPP's understanding of the performance. All EPP and demographic groups can pass, whereas with a norms-based, like by definition, people will fall underneath the mean because yeah, that's the definition.
That's how it works.
That's how math works.
Yeah.
But when there's a steady target, steady standard, anyone can make it. Anyone can meet, much in the same way anyone in A through F can be rated A. And it's more interpretable for stakeholders, I think. And also, but one drawback is that it's not adaptable to statewide trends. So we would set the threshold at whatever number, and scores change every year and performances change. And if we're set, we're not adapting to those statewide trends.
And I would just, hold on,
Yeah.
I'm always chiming in.
Yeah, chime in.
And I think that one of the things, because there was a lot of discussion and work around this norms-based piece, but I think that when we we want to make sure that everybody can get over the line, and that's a thing when it comes to we want to make sure that 100% of programs can meet standards, and that we're not causing any hindrance to that. And so when we think about, you know, setting that target and providing a predictable floor for programs to be able to make sure that they've got that really, I think, rang true with a lot of folks around here. So I just wanted to chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we also consider, in addition to the approach to creating a standard, what some options would look like for the standard itself. So our working group gave us this awesome recommendation to create a confidence interval that we would then compare to the state mean. The strength of that is, like, it includes your recommendation. It allows for that relative comparison that I was talking about. And again, it's more amenable or adaptable even to changes in statewide performance, because you would see, you know, the state mean would move, but then performance and your interval would move along with it. If you've been a part of the working group, I'm sure you've seen kind of the caterpillar plot of what this would look like for actual kind of when we started modeling what this would look like. But essentially, you have super high performing EPPs that perform considerably above the state mean, and then you had performing EPPs that were below the state mean, and their confidence interval depended on how many, you know, completers and various other variables inside of it. Again, a little more complicated math. Some of the drawbacks of that is that it does not allow multiple year consolidation, as I explained, because the norms are different year to year. We can't calculate a confidence interval for EPPs with one completer, and they would probably be in small group exemption either way. And then the lack of teacher level data and final measure limits utility for you guys for your program monitoring and continuous improvement. One thing that's really important to me is that we're not just creating a model for the sake of it, but that we can understand what this performance means in the context of prep programs and preparation, and we can give actionable data back to you all to make those programmatic changes and continue in your continuous improvement. So I didn't want just like a black box and those numbers out to you and say good luck. I wanted to actually be able to give actionable data back to the EPP community so that we can like work together and like continuing to assist our beginner teachers in being prepared for the classroom. And so that's one drawback of that model. The second approach was the same kind of confidence interval, but with a statewide performance standard, so a statewide standard. So instead of the state mean, it would be a static number, static cut score, if you will, and then the EPP performance would align around it, however. So a strength of that is that it does include the work group's recommendation of the confidence interval. A drawback is that, again, it's not responsive to statewide changes. There are challenges to interoperability? Interpretability? Oh, like, sorry,
I wrote that one.
it.
You got PPDM on your mind, interoperability.
I do.
That is funny.
Sorry. Whether that can be interpreted by SPEC and the public and general EPP users, and then kind of the same drawbacks from the first approach. Did you want to elaborate on either of those two drawbacks?
No, I just that piece about kind of interpretability, and of course then making sure that like y'all have visibility at the individual grain size. And so I'll kind of chime in on this third piece. So kind of where we've gotten to is thinking about similar to what we do for other metrics, looking at essentially creating an individual score, and then seeing the number of teachers or the percentage of teachers at an ed prep program that meets that individual score. And we'll see this a little bit further fleshed out on the next slide. But what we think is a benefit here is that this allows us to have individual teacher information for EPPs, which, as Nicole noted, that's we think that's important for you all to be able to like look and disaggregate in your own ways based on your own programmatic characteristics. Like I said, we've got more alignment here with other indicators, and it does allow us to, in a straightforward way, consolidate multiple years of data in order to aggregate for small groups. And it also allows us that sort of like year-over-year interpretability and predictability. Now, I'll totally own that this is not, this did not come out of the original working group recommendation, but we think that there's real benefits to it, and so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to raise it with you all. And of course, similar to any performance metric is that since it's not norms-based, it will be a predictable target. But that means that if the whole state shifts upwards, it could be, you know, an outdated target to be trying to hit.
Absolutely. So this is actually what that standard would look like setting the individual mean to a state cut score. So we modeled it at multiple levels. So we would take the individual performance. So each candidate would have a score. And so this is going back to the aggregation conversation. We modeled this by aggregating it at the teacher level. So remember teacher B, who had taught 2 different courses, we collapsed their score down to 1. And then we compared it to the various different cut scores of 50, 60, 65, and 70. Going back to the conversation about the proficiency levels and what these actual growth scores mean. So the reason we started with 50 is that it's kind of an understanding that if if a student has a growth score of 0.5 within the model or 50, that means that they started and ended at the same place, that there was no harm done to the student, there was no no adverse negative trajectory, like the student began and left the classroom on the exact same track. So we thought that's a fair place to start when thinking about this model. And then each step up from that is just an improvement in the outcomes for that student and also the class student. So if you think about, like, we're averaging all the students, that means at least the students that grew a lot and versus the students that didn't grow at all or had negative growth, they're balanced out, bare minimum. So from there, I counted the percentage of individuals who passed the state performance metric, again, aggregating at the teacher level. And then we set the percentage pass rate at 70% for the EPPs. So then we linked back all the completers to the EPP, similar to as we do with indicators 2 and 5. So the top table in the top right, where it says 2018 individual, this is what the model looks like for the individuals themselves. So when you look at all the candidates' scores, 78% of them met the 50 cut score. So they had at least 50 or higher. And 22% did not meet the 50 cut score. We can see at the 60 cut score, it starts to get, you know, lesser and less, fewer and fewer individuals are meeting. So we see about 64% meet at the 60 cut score, about 55% meet at the 65 cut score, and then amazing performing teachers, we have at like 45% are at above the 70 cut score. When we look at that through the EPP lens, we see that about 78% of EPPs met the 70% threshold of their candidates meeting 50 cut score. And that sounds really convoluted, but that, like, if you think about it as like indicator 2, yeah, 78% of all EPPs completers made the cut score.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I would just reiterate that. So it's similar to what we do elsewhere. Is we take a look at the essentially the average student growth score for the teacher, and we say, is that actively doing harm, or is that at least neutral? Which is where we got to the 50. And then we add up we look at how many of the EPP's candidates do we have data for? That becomes the denominator. How many of those candidates met that 50? That becomes the numerator, and then we get to a percentage on it. And I think the next slide shows us what that looks like at the state level. So at the state level, again, and this was important because we want to get an eye and have visibility on our different demographic groups, since statutorily we're required to break those out and have that be part of the standard. And so when we do that, we see, and actually these, it's interesting because both the average growth score and the met the 50 cut score to some extent follow along with other metrics that we see as far as like having a little bit above, a little bit below the state line across different demographic groups. And so you can see we modeled it with higher individual cut scores, and we start to get far lower numbers. but with a 50 cut score on there for the individuals, individuals got to get 50 to actively not doing harm stage. The state level meets, and I think that's a great question, Jim, about the standard deviations for each group. At the end, these are things that we did model when we were going along with the confidence intervals, and we do not have that included in here. I believe that's been in a lot of the Indicator 3 slideshows, so we'll be happy to follow up with you on that.
Yeah, and also I'm going to yes and that. But as we talked about in the working group, not only is it important just conceptually that everyone can pass it, I think as a value statement, we want a model in which everyone has a chance to pass it. And I was really happy to see that every demographic group passed it. And you can see the performances are very similar. I think that's also important to know when we move, as we move to Met 60, Met 65, the performances are very similar. And we didn't see that necessarily in other modeling and other types of standards that we set up. So this once again emerged as like the leader and the best proposal or best option because all demographics pass, all EPPs have a fair shot at passing, and I think it's the most, I guess, equitable is the word I'm looking for on that.
So we do have a few targeted questions for feedback that we'd like to gather from y'all. Oh, and they all came up at the same time. You know, I added animation to some of these slides, but that's okay. That's okay. So the first thing kind of harkens back to the first question that we asked about, and that's this question of the course level aggregation to the EPP or the teacher level aggregation to the EPP. With the idea that if we were at the course level, there is the potential for individuals, particularly individuals who are teaching 4th and 5th grade, most likely, to be double counted in the data set, once for their ELA growth, once for their math growth. The flip side is that, you know, there's the potential to have more data in there and to get visibility on those data separately. So we'd love if folks had thoughts about that distinction, to share and engage around that piece. So again, please do, here in a little bit on the chat, teacher makes more sense. Please do capture your thoughts on that feedback document, and we will be grateful for it as we get to it. You might have seen in the manual, we drafted it as both ways, just because we're trying to drive our thinking forward on that in both ways. The next piece, wondered if folks had any thoughts about that individual performance of a 50. Again, that like I said, our justification was mapping that onto kids. The average student in that classroom then stayed at the same proficiency level year over year, and that's where we came up with that. I wonder if folks had any thoughts or feedback about that. And I see that Sharon Evans has raised her hand. Sharon, do you have? Would you like to share on that?
Yeah, well, I raised my hand for the first one. And so may I ask a question on that?
Please do. Sorry about that. We missed it.
That's all right. So I'm wondering about what potential negative implications it would be with the teacher level aggregation in terms of the possibility of them being counted twice. Will that inflate, when you disaggregate by EPPs, will that inflate the numbers so that it appears that we have a certain number of teachers when actually it's not, they're counted twice? I remember with the PEAK program, the value added issue was that the ends were so small when you began to drill down to who taught 3rd and 5th grades with that were in the STAR tested grades, that they really were not able to come up with valid information because the ends were so small. And so that's just kind of in the back of my mind. Will this inflate the ends so that it appears to be something that it's not?
I think that's a great point. So yeah, I mean, I think that we do run down the line, if we took the course level instead of the teacher level, like we said, folks would potentially, particularly in 4th and 5th grade, where generalists are generally teaching both math and ELA, would be potentially counted twice, and that would be both at the all level and within the individual demographic group. So there is the possibility that not only would those numbers maybe not align with what we would expect as far as total ends, but also that, you know, the flip side, we would likely have less small group aggregation to do because those small groups would get filled up more quickly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the way to quantify this because I've looked at those numbers as well, and it's interesting because it differs by EPP, first off, but I think it comes to like maybe a 1.25, multiplying the N of teachers to find out the N of courses. So maybe 1 out of every 4 teachers teaching multiple subjects. So it would, I don't know if the word inflate is correct, like exactly what we're looking for, but it would change the N size as well.
It would definitely increase it.
It would definitely increase it. The added bonus of giving the additional visibility of what programmatically, like what that looks like. What does it mean for your completers who are teaching ELA versus teaching math? I thought that type of insight would be particularly useful for prep programs. Jem, you had a question.
Yeah, I had a bunch of comments. So if we do it at the course level, then you'll see in my comments to everybody, a math teacher who only teaches math for 6 classes would dominate the ratings in some respects, because EC6 would only be, in a lot of grades, will only be tested in 1 or 2 subjects. So a teacher who's teaching in 3rd grade would only have the reading test score for her students. So that's 1 score, whereas somebody who's teaching Algebra 1 could have 6. And so that teacher dominates the ratings over somebody who's like in an EC6 area. So that's why I would argue against the course level and argue for the teacher level aggregation. The 50 level of performance to me makes sense given what the 50 means. The thoughts about the EPP performance being at 70, that seems reasonable to me. There are other issues that I don't think have been addressed here that I want to bring up. One is the issue of the out-of-field teaching. I don't know what was decided on whether to include teachers who are being assigned to teach classes they were not trained to teach, because principals are biased in how they assign teachers. If you're Black, you're in a rural school, you're alternatively certified, you are way more likely to be assigned classes you're not trained to teach. And it's going to hurt any EPP that has a large number of Black teachers, a large number of rural teachers, or ACPs in general. So what's the status on out of field?
So just thanks for raising that. I know that we looked at kind of like the impact of this and the number of folks, and I'll let Nicole speak to that. I will ask Nicole
teased me up for that. That's great.
To speak to that somewhat.
Yeah, so what we found was actually about 55% of completers within the data set had either core subjects or generalist certification. When you look at the specific, again, we have the course broken down like ELA versus math. If you look at math certification types for that course, we see 91% of the teachers teaching that tested subject were certified in math or math/physical science/engineering/ core subjects or generalist. And for ELA, 89% were certified in ELA or social studies or core subjects or generalist.
And that's ELA social studies.
ELA
not
social.
ELA or
sorry.
Right,
Flat.
but you're aggregating from EC to 12. You're not looking at things like the 712, it sounds like, or are you? Because to me, the rates at 712 are very different than they are at the EC6 level.
Yep, so this was looking just at the sample with growth scores that we had. So we were looking within the kind of the sample that we'd be able to make these, to do this modeling with anyway. And so in math, it's about 9% that we had math, right? About 9% that we had folks that we had math growth scores that didn't have a core subject or a math cert. And with ELA, it was about 11% they had ELA growth scores that didn't have ELA or core subjects. One thing that I do think that is interesting and important to note, that when we looked at this and we compared those folks out who didn't have the cert versus those who did have the cert, and Nicole's going to correct me if I'm wrong, but our folks who didn't have an ELA cert but had ELA growth had higher ELA growth than, and again, it's a small n, but they had higher ELA growth than the folks who had the core subject or the ELA cert. Now in math, it was flipped, I believe.
Yeah.
So ELA who had folks with course without a math cert or a core subject cert who had math growth scores were slightly below folks with the math, but it wasn't but like we said, so there was, it's kind of two different sides to that when we modeled it out. And I think where the working group landed is took a look at the fact that we've kind of got close and a little bit above and a little bit below, and move forward with keeping all the data. Because that's what we saw coming out of the folks that we actually have growth scores for.
Right. And so yes, and that I looked at that from multiple different perspectives. I looked at it EPP-wide, and it was interesting to see divergent narratives. So some EPP completers had different outcomes, whether or not they were certified, than other EPPs, and you could see the exact opposite for different subject areas. Long story short, there was no way to make sense of it. So the reason I was advocating for keeping all the data within the model so they can get a robust view of all teachers that are teaching tested subjects, and also just to make sure we can get that data back to the prep programs as well. But there wasn't a clear narrative of the scores being affected by certification field name for those outside of the categorical alignment with the STAR exam.
That's a great question.
Were there any other questions? Any other thoughts about the EPP performance standard of 70 or the individual performance metric at 50?
So folks at Region 19, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, so our question is, what student growth data is going to be used for those teachers that do not teach any STAR tested courses? So for example, a chemistry teacher or a second grade teacher, what student growth data is going to be used?
Very good question. This was one of the first things that we had to kind of grapple with. The nature of this model is that it's limited to tested subjects. And that's something that that's a massive disadvantage that we just kind of had to link into due to us not having statewide assessments for every subject for every teacher. So I guess our justification for that is like A through F reconciles this because we have set a priority of these specific tested subjects. We've created this growth model as a priority for the agency, and so we're aligning with that as well. Unfortunately, that means, you're right, second grade teachers or secondary teachers will not show up in this data set ever because we don't have growth scores for them. We do have additional growth scores for like Algebra 2 EOC, and I think there's one more, but that's limited information. And
right.
not to be that person, but I want to revert back to where in statute it says to the extent practicable, and this is the extent that we're limited with.
Okay, so they're just not going to be counted in the accountability model?
So so similar to the K-12 accountability model where they're using these growth scores, we're following along there. That is, as Nicole said, it's a limitation of the data that we've got.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to make sure to raise the next question about here. So as we think towards operationalization, we've talked a little bit here about, as you might be aware, when we quote unquote go live with an indicator, we generally put report only years. So years where the standard, we make the data available to EdPrep programs, but we don't, it's not used for the determination of accreditation statuses. Clearly, 1920 data would be report only, but we wondered about the group thinking around the academic year 2020, 2021. I have a hard time saying that academic year for 23 times in a row, but this is the following year. So 2020, 2021, your thoughts on this standard being used or still being report only for that year?
Hi, Mark, this is Ray. My thoughts on when we look at data that's report only, and I can use the analogy of the principal survey, is when you do a survey, and let's say the 18-19 survey, we get that data back in the following fall, and it's really hard to implement any substantive changes to a program when we're turning around and taking that data again. So I want to make sure that when we're looking at report only years, that programs have time to review their data. They have time to, at the beginning of the next school year, implement some new changes with a new batch of interns and study if those changes are working. I don't feel like we've got to turn around a system that gives us the opportunity to experiment and implement changes before being hit again with a new set of data.
So Ray, I really appreciate your thinking on that. And so I feel like, and I'm hearing some other things on the chime in that districts go report for 2 years and then before they would use it. Seeing Dr. Diaz chime in. So I guess what I'm hearing from the group is that if we could, we can get the 1920 data for report purposes, but it would be recommendation of the group to also have the 2020, 2021 data be report only, and then after that, go for utility. And again, please do note on your feedback doc so we can make sure that, because we always do kind of like to have a running tally of folks that, especially on either or questions like this, so that we can provide clear guidance not only to ourselves but also to other folks who are interested in the answers to these questions. One more thing, kind of like as we are reaching the end of this portion of our presentation, Marcelo had a question real quick about how we get to that 50 metric. Nicole, can you push us back to the page that shows the 0, the 0.5, and the 1?
Yeah.
Because that, I think, is the easiest way to explain this. So, Marcelo, so if you take a look at this, no, it's great. So you take a look at these, each individual student, if they and let's just say 3rd grade math, go from, so 3rd grade math, they have a STAR score of approaches standard. And then if they, in 4th grade math, get a approaches standard, that's the orange to the orange, that in the K-12 accountability system, that counts as a 0.5 for that kid. If they go from 3rd grade approaches to 4th grade meets, they count as a 1.0. If they go from 3rd grade to approaches to 4th grade did not meet, so, you know, their performance, their standard category goes down from year 1 to year 2, that's a 0. Now, when we add all these up at the teacher level, you can see that, so let's take the example of we've got 10 kids. If 10 kids all went approaches to approaches, each one of those 10 kids would get a 0.5. And when we added up to the teacher got a 5. Okay. Well, they get a 5, we would divide it by the 10, they get the 0.5, and then we multiply it by the 10, by the 100 to get to a 50.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we get to that 50 is on average your kids stayed at the same level. Now let's take those same 10 kids. Let's say 5 of them go from approaches to meet, so they all get a point. So that's a total of 5 points. And the other 5 go from approaches to did not meet, so they all get 0 points. We take the 5, we divide it by the 10, we multiply by 100, and we get the teacher score of 50 again. So that's this idea that the average for the students with the teacher is gets us to that 50. So as Jim also elucidated, the idea here is that we're mapping onto a standard of do no harm, and just the nature of averaging, right, is that if half your class goes, has really strong growth, and then half your class regresses, that's the same in an average of doing no harm. So that's kind of how we got to that thing. Last question around, and a couple of questions here from Dr. Diaz. Amberlynn, would you like to unmute and walk us through your thinking?
Sure. Sorry, I don't think you guys answered these questions, but I had to step out for a quick minute. So the first one was, is it possible as we think through making these decisions that, like today, it would have been really helpful if we could have had a data set based off of the scores from I know you couldn't have done it because we are looking at the formula, but the scores that would be reflective of our EPP? Like, is that possible?
So I think that once we get, this as once we get a methodology adopted in the rule, I think we're comfortable with making data available. But as we're still in this phase where we're modeling and back and forth, we definitely want to provide, we don't want to cast confusion into the field, but but I think that's the nature of the report-only year, and I think it's why folks were strongly advocating for 2 report-only years here, was that once we've got this, our methodology squared away and adopted into the manual by the SBEC, then that gives us the opportunity to provide y'all with those data so that you can take a look at them.
Okay, and then did you guys discuss if the scaled score on the STAR changes?
So that's a great question, and it's one of the reasons why we have gone down this road kind of initially, and why working with the work group is that we following the K-12 accountability measure and using these the performance levels. We're just following the same things that the K-12 schools are held accountable for, and so the performance monitoring group takes care of bringing all of those pieces of information into their model and landing on the student growth. And so we let them do that work, and then we just follow along with the 0, 0.5, and 1.
And also, yeah, I was just saying, this was actually just recently brought up within our work group, and that is something I am, in communication with performance reporting about any changes that would happen to the STAR and those proficiency levels. The raw STAR scores proficiency changes are one thing. Whether or not it's mapped to the growth indicator would be actually different in and of itself as well. So thinking through what the thresholds of proficiency are, I'm not sure what those changes will look like, but that is something that we're absolutely monitoring. And the good thing is, like, we can change where our cut scores are if there are drastic changes to the growth measure itself. the thing about that is I don't think there will be. So he can call me out on that in a couple of years, like, he can circle back. But also a lot is, there's a lot behind A through F that I don't think drastic changes to each individual domain would happen simultaneously. So we're in that, I don't think indicator 2A specifically, or domain 2A specifically would change too much. But that is something that we're absolutely monitoring as well. And I also see Sarah Guthrie had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question about that. I know we had talked about several versions of reporting for that score. And I was just wondering if we are going to be able to see sort of like at least what degree path that was on, like if it was middle school math or ELAR or elementary reading that the scores were coming back. And the reason I was thinking about that is because we have a very large faculty, and so we're kind of like warehoused by area. So if there's an area of weakness, it's one set of people. And if there's a different area, it's like a different set that we would need to intervene on.
Dr. Guthrie, thank you so much for that question and for raising it. So I wanted to let you know that we are actively in conversation with our friends in the legal privacy department here in order to suss out exactly what and how and when we can get you all this information. Our goal kind of from the beginning of this is to get you granularity at least down to the teacher level, because we know that you as an ed prep program have the best idea as far as like what does your what route did these teachers go through, who were their professors, that whole thing. And so that is our current goal. I'm seeing you know, and we know that generally my experience with this work group is trying to make, it's a consistent push to make more data available to y'all, and just know that it's an open conversation that we continue to engage with our legal department on, and that our goal is to get y'all teacher level data so that we don't have to say, oh, here's your people who went through this and here's your people who went through that, because you know how that goes together. And then one more question. We did look at the percentage of tested teachers that each program has. So we looked at the overall statewide, and it was about 18 to 20%.
No, it was like 20. Yeah, it was like, for the statewide, it was 22%.
Yeah.
For the EPPs within, if you look at the EPPs, it was 24%.
Okay, so we did see, so we do have visibility on, for EPPs around, it's a little bit less than a quarter, around 24% there. And Jim, I'll be happy to forward you some education code citations related to this and some pieces, but just know that we kind of continue to keep an eye on that pieces. Cool. Did folks have, just because I do want to make sure that we have additional, we've got the room for our next conversation. I'm going to encourage you all to go ahead, capture additional feedback on your feedback forms. Like I said, we are happy to use that. And we've got for our next steps that we want to grab all that feedback from y'all and to consolidate it. We'd like to continue to gather other stakeholder feedback. As you know, we get to talk with teacher organizations, with districts, with folks here internally, with other rulemaking groups, and so we need to make sure that we are considerate and understand those voices. Our goal is to gather, to bring this as a discussion item when we talk with the SBEC about Chapter 229 in May of 2020, that's May 1st, at their next meeting. And then following that, we would update any additional feedback and put that into the manual, and then have that. Our goal is to have 4 proposals for 2020. That's going to allow us to, if we do move ahead on, like if we're able to move ahead on that timeline, that gets us able to get a methodology in place and get this 1920 report-only data to y'all once that's cleared, and then we would have the 2021 data to y'all as well. Your recommendation, pretty clear today, was that 2021 would be report-only as well. and then get that data back to you on the same timeline that we're able to get ASAP data back to you. So thank you so much, y'all, for really rich conversation about Indicator 3.
Yeah, and just to circle back, because this is top of my head, Ray, thank you for that question, because the way in which this indicator works, like, of course, we have to wait for the STAR results to happen May, June-ish timeframe. And then the state itself has the A2F analysis, of which they released around August. So we will be able to get this information back to you early fall. So early fall this year, we'll have 3 years worth of data. So we have 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20.
Oh, because we have the 17, 18 data.
Exactly. So we'll have 3 years starting this fall.
So that'd be an opportunity for y'all to do additional sort of like longitudinal analysis and take a look at folks. I know that y'all are consistently making programmatic improvements, so hopefully that'd be able to get y'all to be able to map back to what's going on there. Our next piece today is about the ASAP index. I wanted to thank you all for rich conversation about the ASAP index during the November data working group meeting and your continued advocacy for this approach to combining and consolidating all of the ASAP indicators. I wanted to provide you with a little bit of reminders for folks who may not have been able to join us last time, just about kind of where we're at, and then provide you with some updates from additional feedback that we've gotten, and then have some additional discussion about this as we move towards the same timeline, getting to discuss this with BSPEC in May. So as you may be aware, currently all our ASAP indicators are weighted the same in that they all function the same way within the system. This means that widely different EPP performance can yield the same accreditation statuses. Anytime we engage with this conversation, we think it's important for us to remember that ASAP is in statute and that the SPEC has encouraged us to explore this issue of creating an index. What you see before you is the ASAP matrix. So we talked about this last time when we entered into our indexing conversation, is that for each standard, there is the all column, and then there's the individual demographic groups. We have the opportunity to weight separately the all group from the individual demographic groups. And we also have the opportunity to weight separately the individual indicators. That's what you see on the left, the weights for standard 1A, weight for standard 1B, and all the way down. This was our conceptual model. Our mathematical model of bringing all these things together, essentially, it says, so for every square in that matrix, we can identify if an EPP met the standard, did not meet the standard, or essentially did not have data for that year, right? So we put all in the ones and zeros, and then we multiply by the weight assigned to the demographic category, and we multiply it by the weight assigned to the standard, and that gets us, we're able to sum up the values for each ed prep program, sum up all the data that's available, and to create a final score, which we multiply by 100 to get a percent, because that's, everybody wants to, we always get asked for percentages. An additional piece that the SPEC, when originally they adopted all these things, they made it's pretty clear from the rule text that continued did not meet standard with the same demographic group with the same standard year over year what was important. It was important to account for that. And so that this piece down here, that essentially if an EPP fails the same square for 2 years in a row, that second year, instead of it being a 0, it would start to count negatively against the score. So we weighted all this and collected great feedback from y'all back in November. And this was where the group, this is a summary of the feedback from the group last time. This has, on the right, you'll see folks advocated for, and this was great, and we kind of sorted this out. It's like, okay, so the all group can be 6, and then each individual demographic group can be 1. That means that essentially all the demographic groups, when you add up all that, it's the same weight as the all. And then for the individual standard, folks advocated to have 1A be a weight of 4, 1B a weight of 3, 2 and 3 to be a weight of 1, 4A and 4B to be a weight of 3, and 5 to be a weight of 2. Again here, the heavier the weight, or the larger the number, the more impactful the indicator to the final percentage. Also, there was a pretty consistent recommendation for an 80% to be for the, for lowered accreditation status. So we modeled that. And based on 18-19 data, and we tossed in the survey data, even though it was report only for 18-19. We were just trying to get a good idea as far as like what the model might look like. So just for modeling purposes, we included that data when we modeled this. And this is the distribution of overall EPP scores that we saw. We saw, like I said, about 19-ish% of EPPs below that 80% line, a handful between 80 and 85 that had been in discussion about trying to understand where that 80-85 was. And then the lion's share of ed prep programs above that 85. We then, bottom right is the original proposed accreditation statuses for this year. So just kind of comparing, essentially, if we took the 80% as being for lowered accreditation status, that would be about the same number of folks who were accredited probation this year under the current system. So there's a sort of in one way, that means, because that would be everybody would go to the standard, but so we see some alignment there. Our next steps out of that last meeting were to take this model and combine it with feedback from other stakeholders and to write up the resulting model into manual text. We also had our next steps that we were going to bring in February, but our 229 discussion item got bumped from the agenda. So we will be bringing that in May of 2020, hopefully. I really, really hope. Yeah. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the internal feedback that we got when we brought this to some other folks within and across our divisions. So the good news is that we got general support for the model, which is really, that was the have to have, is that we needed to get signaling from other folks that there was support for this model and for this approach to indexing the SPEC. We also got folks to suggest that we allow the best result of the two systems for the 1920 reporting year. So if we went ahead and moved forward with this index, we would do it on this rulemaking timeline. And what we would like to do would be to say, for the 1920 reporting year, basically the better results of the system that's in place now and the index system is the result that the EPP would get. This would allow us to have a transition year between the two systems and kind of do that, that hold harmless piece. In almost all the modeling we've done, programs do better underneath the index system than in the current system. But we would just want to make sure that just in case there was kind of an exotic situation, we would make sure that we would have a hold, essentially a better of the two systems year to make the transition happen. The third thing we heard was openness to adjusting weights over time. So one of I think the advantages of this of moving to an index system is the opportunity to change weights over time. And this is essentially as expectations change, or we I think y'all know is that if there's new initiatives frequently, and so so by being able to weight indicators differentially, we would be able to. We don't have the flexibility in the ACEP system right now to differentially weight and to adjust those things to take into account outside conditions, but we would have that opportunity with an index, and there was openness amongst the stakeholders that we talked to around adjusting those weights over time. The last piece, and I'll just be totally blunt with you, there was strong and consistent advocacy for a higher weight to the student growth indicator. Sort of around the justification that what's our purpose as an education system? It's to educate students. What type of message does it send if we put the lowest weight on the thing that's actually measuring students, K-12 students learning, all of that type of commentary. And so that was, as far as like the individual weights, that was the only one that I sort of consistently had folks that I talked to this about push back on and push back pretty robustly. So as I said, I got that feedback, and so this is my model based on if my internal stakeholders got their way. And you'll see that this follows the same recommendations with the change of, instead of a 1 for student improvement, there was a 4 there. So that heavily weights that improvement in student achievement, with the idea that this is the ultimate goal for K-12 schools, is for students to grow and learn. So that's kind of what's happened between then and now, between November and now. So what I'd like to do today, and I'd really like for folks to capture, not only in this conversation, but to capture on your feedback document, your thoughts around these pieces. But I'd just like to open it up to gather some feedback from folks, their thoughts about weighting. Yeah, I see that Jim's raised his hand. Jim, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So until we understand the underlying data on student growth and the potential to have it be a biased system, weighting at a 4, I think, is a recipe for disaster. You know, I think we need a lot more time looking at the actual data and the aggregation method before I'd be comfortable giving it anything close to that.
Okay, so the idea that we would need, we just need more information before making that strong weight. All right. Other thoughts? Yes, Sharon?
So it is one measure of discussing student growth. And it's somewhat of a controversial measure. So to weigh, and the other pieces, the other pieces in the other indicators are, in my opinion, they're a little more holistic. And I don't think you can evaluate, because what we're looking at is evaluating a program. And I don't think you can evaluate a program in its entirety and how we're doing with training teachers to be effective with their students by weighting one measure of student growth. And one, as I said, one measure that doesn't have 100% buy-in from everybody is I think risky. And I agree with Jem that I really want to look carefully at the kinds of things that we're going to say about that data when we look at the data.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, we talked about sort of even within an EPP, it's, you know, it's not a majority % of folks that are even captured in that data. So I think that's a useful perspective as well. Dr. Diaz, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I've said this for a very long time, and I know that it is law that we are working to be in compliance with, that there are external controls that are factors that we don't have any control of. So we know that a lot of times new teachers are in low socioeconomic schools, and I get that there's always a model to differentiate the scores. But we still have to have time to research. We have to have time to understand the implications of the scores and all of the factors that would lead us to determine an EPP's accreditation So I just think we need time. I think that we're already giving ourselves time with allowing the 2 years. So if we're giving ourselves time there, we should give ourselves time here in this score as well.
That makes that, yeah. So I'm hearing the same sort of thinking around that that Jim had shared around the, that this is we need time to see what's going on with these data, with what these data look like over a few years. We've already built that into the report only, but just similarly along the same lines on this weighting. Jim, did you have another comment? You had your hand up?
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, Nicole said that the growth data were based on 22% of the teachers.
Right.
So we've got 22% of the teachers times 4. That's a huge amount that's being accounted for in the system with such a small percentage of the candidates.
Yes.
No, makes a lot of sense.
This is Ray.
Hi, Ray.
I always at the what ifs and what could happen, because as we know, you have to prepare for that worst case scenario because it could eventually show up. That you could have a program that had didn't meet the indicator for, let's say, Hispanic females in their PPR testing, but yet their students are growing. So you've got a situation where you say, man, your teachers can't pass the PPR, but yet their students are doing great in the classroom. So we're setting ourselves up to look at all of this data that we are going to see conflicting information. And so I guess what I try to wrap my head around is when you can see conflicting parts where this program didn't do so good here, but they did really well here, but their growth score was good, but their PPR scores were not, and they missed a couple of observations, or they've got a subpopulation that didn't have good pass rates here. The overall picture that we're sending, and an example that I can refer to is just in the last SBEC meeting, when we were looking at commendations, you had a program that received all of these commendations for doing great things, but yet they were closed down because they didn't want to do the work to make improvements. So I think that just sends a conflicting message as to, where were they really?
No, and so Ray, I really appreciate you thinking through what ultimately may be a counter argument, an argument for keeping a little bit more weight on the student growth indicator is that, if a program is performing, the students with their beginning teacher classroom are performing really highly, then it seems like that, maybe, like you said, maybe, the principal survey isn't quite there, the student survey isn't quite there, but the ultimate goal is kids learning. So it seems like we would definitely want to, account for that and highlight that.
I can see that, but I think we need to, I want to echo what Jim said, is I think we need to see the data and see the whole picture before we can, and we need time to research it and see what it's going to look like to play out some of these scenarios.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, because we can have a couple of years of data right now, but as far as being able to forecast out into the future, being able to leverage those report-only years, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, so what I'm hearing kind of like coming from the group, and again, I really encourage folks to capture this on your feedback document, because that allows me to have artifacts to gather together and to bring to folks. But that I'm hearing that we don't have essentially a multiple year, like a whole bunch of years where we really know what this would look like and how this would play out. I'm hearing that due to the limited nature of teachers and tested grades and subjects, this is, based on a small number of completers from the program. I'm hearing that also kind of because of the grades and subjects, this isn't really a holistic measure of the program. I'm hearing, and that we would want to be careful to guard against sending mixed messages with the data coming through. I think that all makes a ton of sense, at least given the perspective that y'all have. I would encourage, like I said, this is something where we've got a lot of different interests. I think somebody said this, it's people will be paying attention to this and that whole thing, and so I would just really appreciate being able to have that captured feedback from y'all, particularly on this measure. And on this weighting piece. I wondered if anyone had any additional thoughts or feedback if you had a chance to look at the way that we had written this out in the manual. Because reason why I ask is that this is the manual is our opportunity to try and provide clarity not only to ed prep programs, but also to the public and to the SBEC about what it is exactly that we're doing and how we do it. So if there was any other feedback, happy to talk about the weighting and stuff, but also if there was any other feedback about the way that this is presented in the manual. So Dr. Diaz, yes.
So first of all, I would like to say that I really like the visual representation in this manual. I think this is the best ACEP manual I've ever seen. I've been only in EPP world for like the last 5 years. So kudos to you guys on a great job. The other thing that I greatly appreciate that I've never really seen before are the scenarios played out. So where we actually look at students and we have data based off of those students and how that would impact the EPP. I think that helps people who, we don't all think like Jim. So people like me who need some examples to see how this would work for our institution. I think that's extremely helpful.
Well, it's good. We appreciate that. And yeah, I think that has been the goal, to be able to provide, an accessible document for folks to be able to grab a hold of. So we will have a little bit of a time to come back to the manual in the end of our conversation today. And again, if you do get additional time to take a look at that text, the May SBEC meeting will be an opportunity for us to have a discussion with the SBEC. So if you're familiar or not familiar with kind of the rulemaking procedures, generally what happens is we have a meeting with discussion, and we try to bring as complete of rule text to that meeting if we're able to as possible. Following that, we get feedback from the SBEC at that meeting, and then we move to a proposal stage where once we post the proposal, that's the actual proposed rule text for consideration by the SBEC. And at that meeting, leading up to that meeting, and at that meeting, there's great opportunities for public comment about the proposed rule text. And then if amendments pass at the proposal meeting, we come back to the final meeting, to a third meeting as an adoption item. So we're, like I said, right now, once I get feedback from y'all, captured, that'll allow me to consolidate that work group feedback, bring that into some other spaces, and to continue to develop forward and land on something to put in front of the SBEC on May 1st for their feedback. And then following that, you know, we've got good, clean feedback from them as well as from y'all. And then we usually get pretty good, clear guidance from them at that point as far as what they want brought back as a proposal. And so what our opportunity in May to do is to say, listen, here's what a number of people have thought about where we're at right now. Here's kind of an option, and what do y'all think? So those are our next steps related to our index system. Thank you all so much for a great conversation on that. If you've been consistent on this work group, you know that we have been working towards this index for some time now. We're getting real close to getting in front of the SBEC, and what I'm really excited particularly about having that year type of best of both systems is it allows us to move to this system that I think is going to be, I think it's going to achieve a lot of goals that folks have been working towards. I'd like to take a moment to talk a little bit about the high-performing EPP category 4. Dr. Queen referenced we were able to award some commendations at this past SBEC meeting, and the fourth category of those commendations is for what in the manual is called innovative educator preparation. So this is just text out of the 1819 manual. So innovative ed prep category lets the SBEC, the board itself, designate EPPs that have implemented innovative approaches to educator preparation. And last year in the manual they adopted, they said, the SBEC seeks to recognize EPPs with innovative practices related to authentic, practice-based educator preparation. So just thinking about strong partnerships with EPPs, partnerships with LEAs and campuses to foster teacher preparation that benefits teachers as well as schools and students in ways that traditional internships or clinical teaching may not. So this is the going above and beyond and doing some working in that innovative space. So this may include, for example, residency models or multiple semester clinical teaching appointments or shared governance structures with districts and EPPs. And we just also noted in there that this would awarding of this commendation would necessitate kind of going well and above those mandated minimums. So we took that and the other rule text, and here's what we think we're asking for in an application packet. So we have a checklist to make sure that you have all the things, some sort of summary that would lay out what the practices, the programming that you are doing that aligns with this, and why you consider that innovative. An explanation, a separate explanation of the programmatic, the values and the goals of the work that you're doing in this specific area. A description of the implementation of current practices as part of a continuous improvement effort. So what we're thinking here is that we would want, the goal is to be able to hold up exemplars and to be able to share with the field as far as like what these innovative programs are doing. So we would want enough visibility to be able to share what y'all are doing. And then documentation describing success, including outcomes or outputs. And we would want to have things that were specific and measurable in order to be interpretable as a board, including some data. Outcomes should indicate sort of that fulfillment of the purpose, the values, and the goals. And then we would also want to have some sort of notation of long-term impact. And the last two here, I think, are important and were captured. Something providing supporting information. This might be from teacher candidates, something from LEAs, from other EPP partners, providing, just so that we have a 360 view of the innovative prep that's going on. And then finally, I think we benefit greatly from practices that are clearly tied back to research efforts. And so essentially the inclusion of research mapping, supporting, advocating for these innovative practices as best in the field. So that's kind of what we were thinking as in an application packet for this thing. Again, this is an optional thing. Our goal is, I will just show the next slide and then open it up to feedback. So we'd like to send this call April 1st with materials due July 1st. The July 1st, so pretty much we're trying to get the call ready as soon as we can. The July 1st is going to be necessary in order to get stuff together for review by the subcommittee of the SBEC. We've got, an inbox. We would just note we need applications to be complete in order for us to review them and complete all at the same time so that all the materials come in and come together. And given that this is a commendation and not a requirement, we would plan on a one-shot review of these materials. We wouldn't plan on doing iterative reviews. I know frequently for some other pieces we do iterations, but since it's a commendation, we think that this is going to be a one review system. So I'd like to pause there and just gather, thinking about kind of these lists of materials, and your program this may not be something that y'all want to invest time towards, but just, if this is of interest to you, I'd love to hear feedback, thoughts, if there's additional things that maybe we should be asking for to make sure we're doing our due diligence. And yeah, one last thing before I open the floor. Our process following the applications of this, we are at the agency do an initial review, make sure we have complete applications, make sure they're aligned with what's laid out there in the manual, and then a subcommittee of the SBEC, which I believe Ms. Rodriguez volunteered to lead, will review the materials, and then it's their discretion as to if they award any or which commendations they choose to award based on these applications. It's our first year doing this. So we're all kind of learning together on this, but I'd love to hear from y'all. Sarah, I see, or Dr. Scudder, I see that you have your hand up. I'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Mark. I just had a question. Were you thinking of this as an annual program where you need to keep applying to stay on a list of commended programs, or are you thinking about this more as highlighting an innovative or novel practice in your program that is more one time only, recognized?
So can I ask, so I make sure I understand, so are you thinking about it needs to be a one-off at the program, or that it's a one-off in the commendation category?
Well, I was just wondering how you were thinking about it. Are you anticipating this to be an annual list of commended programs that have submitted, or is it more a list of this program was recognized for this specific innovation?
That's a great question, and I think I understand it now. So I think the way that we originally thought about it was that every year the SBEC has an opportunity to tweak what it is that they want to see innovative practices in. And so to the extent that that gets changed, we would need to follow along and change the call for the next year to follow that along. I don't have a good feeling. No, I'm not. I don't know. I shouldn't say I don't have a good feeling. I have a lot of good feelings. But I'm not sure if the SBEC will want to change what they want to see for next year or not. As far as sort of that continued application, all of our commendations are awarded in the with a year attached to it, right? And for the other commendations, so for the 95% first time pass rate, right? If your program got that in 18-19, you would need to have a 95% pass rate in 1920 in order to get that commendation. So for 1920. So similarly, if the call grows or changes, we would put out, I think there's the opportunity for us annually to update these calls and review these applications. However, I think that if this one's a little bit special because if this year it's about innovation and practice-based preparation, right? And so I think that likely if a program applied and was awarded and acknowledges being innovative in the area of practice-based preparation, although that may have been awarded in the 1890 or based on the 1819 or the 1920, I feel that a program could pretty clearly and honestly say that we were recognized as being innovative in this space, even though there may be a call for a different area in subsequent years.
So there are a couple comments in the group chat. One from YUK663, I'm not quite sure who that is, but they say innovative programs should be highlighted at CISO or other similar conferences.
Good.
And also on that point, we do have our accommodations page that is new on our website. So once this is stood up, this will definitely be joining that and will be embedded into our dashboards as well.
Yep, and let me plus one that. We're currently working with TEA Communications in order to generate a letter from the SBEC chair to be sent to programs that would be, for display, as well as hopefully, I'm going to knock on wood on this, is putting together a press release related to the commendations for our ed prep programs. We definitely got a lot of excitement from the board at the meeting about the commendation system. A lot of folks that are, they want to make sure that these are recognitions that folks know about. And so, so those are both forthcoming routes towards greater recognition of these achievements.
We also had a question from Ray Queen, and it said, and who will be reviewing the applications, SBEC board members?
That's a great question. So we here at TEA are going to review applications for completeness and alignment with the goals. So it's about practice-based. If it was if it was about something else, then we wouldn't forward that along to the SBEC. But as long as it's aligned and complete, our goal is to then there's a subcommittee of the SBEC that folks volunteered for at the last SBEC meeting. Our plan right now is to put together hand them the application packets from the different programs, and that they would evaluate those, and then the subcommittee of the SBEC, all made of SBEC members, would then have recommendations that they would bring to the full SBEC board, and the full SBEC board would approve or take appropriate action, I suppose, upon the recommendations from their subcommittee. So this is a review of complete materials by the SBEC.
And then a third, as a sub point of that, is Brandon Bush said, to remove potential bias, the SBEC subcommittee should review applications with PPP identifiers removed.
I like that. I think that is there might be a little bit of challenge with that when we think about, making sure that we do have supporting information. If we're getting if you get the superintendent of, your Denton ISD is our local program is doing a really great job. To some extent, it's a little hard to mask all of that, but I do think that that is something that we could, and I will want to. I'll follow up actually with the SBEC subcommittee chair about his thinking on that, because we want to make sure we stay aligned with him on this too. But I think that we could potentially, and in our TEA's initial review, we could kind of read for identifying characteristics and remove or mask those prior to sending along the information. But I think that's a really good idea. Did someone join? That's a great noise. I like that. if you do, please have additional thinking around the structure of this call. I think that we're excited to be able to get to do it. You know, I know that every season is the busy season. And so we do hope that folks would have time over that 3-month window between the call and materials due to be able to gather things if you want to pursue this commendation. And almost next to last piece today is any additional ACEP manual review. So if you did get a chance to take a look at the ACEP manual, that's great. If you didn't, that's also great. You're doing a good job. We added the indicator 3 methodology. We added the index description and an example about the index. Dr. Diaz called that out. We updated the dates throughout. There were a couple of other essentially typographical stuff that I went through and have been cleaning up. So if you do identify, and those things that you see are the main thrust of our updates to Chapter 229, essentially Indicator 3 and the index, when we bring Chapter 229, which is our accountability system chapter of the TAC to the SPEC in May. So this was our previous timeline. It did not happen. Our current timeline is that we will have an SPEC discussion item on May 1st. And like I said, the core content of that will be those 2 pieces related to Chapter 229. So we've talked about Indicator 3, we've talked about the index. Was there other feedback that folks did identify so far in this version of the manual? I see, Jim, you've raised your hand. Yeah, what you got?
Well, I agree with Amber Lynn that this is a great improvement over the prior ones, but it still has the issue of being in violation of state statute around the small group aggregation. You know, the issue that we've talked about is in year 3, if you haven't met the small group in year 1, year 2, in year 3, it's reported regardless of the number of students. That is in violation of state statute.
And what was that statutory reference again for my team?
I'll send you the actual reference.
All right, I'll appreciate it.
Yep.
Anybody else thoughts? Well, please do, as you get a chance to peruse it. If we are missing stuff, we are happy to, or need additional corrections, we are happy to make those, and kind of now is the time for us to engage in that work. A little bit of closing information. Man, it is hot in this room. Oh, man. Sorry. It's the sun. It's that sunset. So a few parting links for y'all, and we'll send these slides out hopefully before the end of the day, so you'll be able to click on these links. The EPP dashboards, they keep getting updated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you to everyone who has given feedback and helped really think through what these dashboards are capable of and help to build them out to meet that vision. We're still gunning. Like, we have this iteration coming out March 20th. We have another one in June. And our version 2.0 should be public in September.
Hitting the streets, I believe.
I'm sorry.
That's funny. Sorry.
It should be live in September.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're still constantly iterating, constantly taking in feedback. Our updates coming in March include a comparison page for Indicator 1B. So you can see content exams, and you can compare at prep programs, much in the same way you can do that with Indicator 1A. So we kind of model it similarly, and then I believe there are some smaller tweaks to Indicator 4A and one other page. Oh, and the updated ACEP statuses will be on the landing page for that as well.
Nice. And so just again to reiterate, we greatly appreciate the feedback that we've gotten from members of this group and across kind of the EPP community and other stakeholders. As she mentioned in there, we've kind of been using this year with quarterly updates to be iterating and improving on this, our version 1.0, and we really are targeting that, is it September release?
Yeah.
That September release as sort of a big, noisier version 2.0 launch. You might remember we kind of did a quiet release on this, and that's given us the opportunity to bring it to a lot of stakeholders and to kind of continue to iterate upwards. And so it is our hope that we get a little bit noisier of a launch of that version 2.0 targeted in September. The second one, as Nicole mentioned, the EPP commendations are online. We actually posted those like the day of the meeting once they voted on it and updated their vote. We're happy to provide that those are online now. And as I mentioned, we're working with our communications team in order to provide additional visibility to those commendations. The board was really excited about being able to recognize programs, and so we want to support their enthusiasm on that. The third thing, this is I don't know if y'all have seen the Texas Teach Like a Champion online as a resource for your ed prep program. I'm just going to encourage y'all to check it out. In a meeting, and they were showing this stuff off, and somebody had mentioned that they were talking to an educator preparation program, and they showed them the Texas Teach Like a Champion online site, and that program was like, wow, this is a really good resource. Given that we did have a member of y'all's community name it as a useful resource, and we also heard that not a lot of people know about it as a resource, just wanted to bring it to your attention that Texas Teach Like a Champion online, it's a cool resource in the world of educator preparation. That's my pitch for it. Last couple of things. We are working on finding a home for these recordings online. I believe that we have a space identified that makes sense for the recording these meetings and also pushing these slides up to there. So we'll look to do that kind of as we're able to. And then finally, please do, those feedback documents are super useful for us to be able to have collected into one place. I know that you might have a lot to say, and I know that you might have, that you want to talk to other folks as you're working on completing that. That's great, but in order for us to be able to make this kind of actionable and for me be able to use it to take next steps, I am asking to have those feedback documents returned by next Thursday, which is 3/12/2020. And you can just email those back to me. I'd greatly appreciate it. We don't have a next meeting date scheduled. I'd kind of like to see what happens with the SPEC related to the manual around the index and indicator 3 before scheduling that, just completely transparently. I think we'll have good support, so kind of waiting on that. Given our kind of cadence, we would aim to have an in-person option for that meeting. But again, even when we run it in person, we also do host the virtual meeting. And that is all the information that we have for y'all today. If folks had any sort of burning desires, happy to raise with the group. If not, I can give you a half hour back. Well, thanks, y'all. We'll go ahead and take that as we'll catch you next time on this. Thanks again all for your time. I know that you are all insanely busy people, and we do like to provide this information for y'all. One last thing, if we do in this space, you know, we've got folks applied to be members and were approved and the whole thing around this. We've been pretty flexible if somebody wants to designate a different person at their institution because they're switching positions around sort of allowing for that. But we do require some documentation around that. So if you're sitting here and you're like, man, actually somebody else from my institution should sit in on these meetings and provide feedback, because that's anybody can sit in, but we really do, as far as like providing the feedback, we hold it to the people who are on the actual membership list. So if you're like, I think Wanda should be on this instead of me, please let me know, and we can do sort of membership transfers. But we do like to have kind of the actual member list, and we do sort of hold the feedback and the conversation with those members. So if you do need to update that with your institution and such, please do just let me know. That's all we've got for you. Thank you all so much for your time today, and we'll be in contact soon, I'm sure.